Hey Combs graduates, it's Mrs. Nunes again. Today we're going to be working on rounding whole numbers. So you can find this on page 6 in your math packet, and I hope that this video helps you out on this page. So here's my poster for today's lesson that's going to help us understand the rules for rounding. Fourth graders need to know how to round whole numbers because it helps you easily estimate to check your answers. You can use estimation and rounding and estimation for adding, for subtracting, for multiplying, for dividing, for everything. So if you are an expert rounder, then you're going to be able to very easily estimate to check all of your answers to the work that you're doing. So the steps for rounding are as follows. Step 1, you're going to find the place that you're rounding to and underline it. Step 1, find the place that you're rounding to and underline it. Step 2 is to circle the digit to the right of the rounding place. Step 3, this is the tricky part. If the number you circled is 5 or more, you're going to add 1 to the rounding place that you underlined. If the number you circled is 4 or less, you're going to leave the rounding place as it is. And step 4, every number after the rounding place has to change to a 0. That's the last step. So you can think to yourself, 5 or more, raise the score. 4 or less, let it rest. So now I'm going to show you a couple of examples of how to use these rounding rules to round. Here are a couple of examples of rounding to the nearest 10. So number 1 is the number 37, and we're going to round it to the nearest 10. So we're going to follow the steps. The first step, step 1, is to find the rounding place and underline it. So if I'm rounding to the tens place, I need to think about this number, think about which number is in the tens place. It has 2 digits, so I know this one's the ones place, so the 3 is in the tens place. So I'm going to use my marker to underline the 3 in the tens place. All right, that's step 1. Step 2 now. Circle the digit to the right of the rounding place. Circle the digit to the right of the rounding place. So if this was the rounding place, I'm going to circle the guy next door. All right, now, step 3, that tricky rule. If the number I circled is 5 or more, I'm going to add 1 to the rounding place. If it's 4 or less, I'm going to leave the rounding place alone. So the number I circled is a 7, which is 5 or more. So that means I'm going to round up. So I'm going to change the 3. I'm going to add 1 to it. So I'm going to add 1. 3 plus 1 is 4. And the last step says that every number after the rounding place changes to a 0. So here's the rounding place, the 3. The number after it is going to change to a 0. So 37 rounded to the nearest 10 is 40. Next example. This number 195. My first step is to find the rounding place and underline it. So I have to find the tens place here. 195. So this is the ones, this is the tens right here. And this is the hundreds, but I'm rounding to the tens place. Underline the rounding place. Step 2, circle the digit to the right of the rounding place. There's my rounding place, circle the guy next door. Now I'm going to think about that rule. Step 3, 5 or more, raise the score. 4 or less, let it rest. So that number I circled is 5. So that means raise the score. I'm going to add 1 here. Now this is interesting. It's an interesting example because when I add 1 to 9, I get 10, but I can't fit 10 in the tens place. So I'm actually going to put a 0 in the tens place and regroup a 1 into the hundreds place. So this number rounded to the nearest 10, and again, the number after the rounding place, the last step here, step 4, every number after the rounding place changes to a 0. So 195, when you round it to the nearest 10, it actually rounds up to 200. One more example like this, 1,344 rounded to the nearest 10. I've got to find the tens place. Thousands place, hundreds place, tens place, here it is, and the ones place. So that's first step is to find the rounding place and underline it. Step 2 is to circle the digit to the right. So I'm going to circle the digit. And now I have to think about that rule. 5 or more, raise the score. 4 or less, let it rest. So the number I circled is a 4. So that means I'm going to let the rounding place rest. Everything before it is going to stay the same. I'm leaving that 4 the same, right? Because the 4 we circled told us to let it rest. And then step 4, don't forget the last step is everything after that number that you underlined, it has to change to a 0. So 1,344 rounded to the nearest 10 is 1,340. Let's try a few more examples together, and then I will leave you to try it on your own. So you might not always be asked to round to the nearest 10. You might be asked to round to different place value positions. For example, this problem is asking us to round to the nearest 100. So this number 57,365, I have to find the hundreds place. It might help if I read the number out loud. I might hear how many hundreds are in it. 57,300. So that tells me the 3 is in the hundreds place. Again, I can also count from the ones place, tens place, hundreds place. So I underline the rounding place, circle the number next door. Now I think about this number next door. Think about that rhyme. 5 or more, raise the score. 4 or less, let it rest. This is 6. That's more than 5. So we're going to round up. I'm going to add 1 to this 3. Everything before the rounding place stays the same. Since we said we're rounding up, we're going to add 1. 3 plus 1 is 4. And then everything after the rounding place changes to zeros. So to the nearest 100, this number rounds to 57,400. This example is asking us to round to the thousands place, the nearest 1,000. So 60,751, I have the ones place, the tens place, the hundreds place. Here's the thousands place. I'm going to underline the rounding place, circle the number next door. 5 or more, raise the score. 4 or less, just let it rest. 7 is more than 5, so that means we're going to round up. I'm going to add 1 to the rounding place. So again, everything before the rounding place stays the same. I'm adding 1 to my rounding place. Everything after the rounding place has to change to a 0. 1, 2, 3. So 60,751 rounded to the nearest 1,000 is 61,000. And you might get a problem that asks you to round to the nearest 10,000. So you're going to use your place value positions to find the 10,000s place. Alright, so we have the ones, the tens, the hundreds. This is the thousands. This is the 10,000. So I'm going to underline it. I'm going to circle the digit next door. And think about my rhyme. 4 or less, let it rest. 2 is less than 4, so that's telling me to round down. Which means, again, everything before the rounding place stays the same. Since I'm rounding down, the number that's underlined in that rounding place is going to stay as a 9. And then everything after the rounding place has to change to 0. So 192,647 rounded to the nearest 10,000 is 190,000. So now I challenge you, Gomes graduates, can you round this problem? Can you round or answer this question? What is 39,764 rounded to the nearest 10,000? Post your answer in the comments below, and I will get back to you to let you know if you're right. Rounding has a lot of rules, and it can be a little bit tricky, but once you've got that procedure down and you've got those rules memorized, it's going to make solving other problems really easy for you because you'll be able to check your answer. You'll feel more confident in your math skills because you'll have a way to estimate to check if your answer makes sense. So if you have any questions about rounding or about page 6 in your math packet, post a comment, send me a message on Class Dojo. I'm here for you. All right, I miss you. Take care and keep working hard. See you soon.